Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on scaling up in India. Today, we'll be discussing what are the challenges that Indian startups face when it comes to scaling up, when it comes to becoming profitable, and what is it that we can do to create more mini multinationals in the country. So, I'll quickly introduce the panelists. I have Vijay Shekhar Sharma with me, who is the founder and CEO of Paytm. K.T. Rama Rao, who is the Minister of IT, Telangana. We have Karthik Hosenegar, who is a professor at the Wharton University, University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School, I'm sorry, University of Pennsylvania, and Gaurav Dalmia, who is the chairman, Dalmia Group Holdings. So I'll dive straight into it. Vijay, I'll begin with you. So I found this interview that you did in 2016. I think this was right after demonetization. And you spoke to Tech in Asia, where you said, I'm paranoid about scale. I'm paranoid about tech scale, process scale, people scale. Can you just unpack that for us?
I think unlike Western world where per capita income is very high, so if you want to build $1 billion revenue, you could build it on a certain smaller customer base. In India, which is a fraction of that country, you have to build process and people structure at a very massive scale. Unlike every other Western education book or experienced person that you will see, that has only been seen in a country like China actually before us. So I'm paranoid because when I get to see that if we want to be a sizable company which is worth its salt, then we want to build a scale of people, scale of process, a scale of technology, unlike ever before that is seen in this country.
Okay.
So 100% paranoid about those three things because it's not about cracking a business model in this country. It's about executing the business model to the last person, like at least 200 to 300 million customer. And then if you really want to become big, then 500 to 600 million customers and so on.
So I'm sure you hear this very often about how demonetization put Paytm in this enviable spot, and your transactions skyrocketed. You had millions of merchants suddenly. But what did this kind of windfall? What was the other side of this kind of sudden scale, like the anxiety and the whatever?
The first thing was the leg being pulled. The rest of the ecosystem was just pulling the leg, so that why are you only doing it? No, it was open for everyone, by the way. So that's nothing. I think it is very odd for us to believe that we were the single largest beneficiary when it was going on. There is no doubt about it that digitization won over the industry, digitization won over the banking ecosystem, digitization and digitization. I'm not calling monetization, if you notice. Monetization gave boost to the digital economy unlike ever before. And by the way, I just want to tell you on the record in this room, this country's windfall of digitization is not because demonetization, is because of Jio. That is a fact as a number. We should understand, people do things in obligation, but when people do it by choice, that is what Jio could do it. So what we are seeing post facto effect is that people got to know a little bit of us because of the noise around it and communication around it, but the reality is that the real transactions are post facto.
Okay. And Minister, I'll come to you. Vijay mentioned that how we have to look at, maybe we can look at China when we want to understand that kind of scale. I know you've been heavily inspired by some of the companies in Silicon Valley. You worked as an IT professional in the US. So what are some of the steps that your government is taking to create a good environment for startups?
Well, let me start by saying this. A lot of times, the best thing a government can do, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, is don't meddle. Actually, don't do anything that will stifle innovation. Don't do anything that will kind of create such regulatory environment which kind of kills innovation. That's the number one thing government can do. But beyond that, in fact, a lot of people believe that governments have very little to do with innovation and entrepreneurship, but I think to the contrary. In fact, if you think back, even in the United States, since you mentioned United States, today we talk about Silicon Valley being the Mecca of innovation. But even Silicon Valley was a byproduct, was an extension of the Stanford Park that the state government there helped put forward about 30, 40 years ago. Then even if you look at internet, which has now kind of changed everything, including the billions and billions of dollars Vijay is making today, I think was also a byproduct of a state-funded project. So the fact of the matter is governments do matter in creating an environment, fostering an environment, and creating more entrepreneurship in an economy. To that effect, what the government of Telangana has done is created India's largest technology incubator in Hyderabad called the T-Hub. In fact, we have not been satisfied with what we've achieved. Today, we've embarked on a larger mission. We are creating world's largest technology incubator in Hyderabad again, at phase 2 of T-Hub, which will be up and running the first quarter of next year. So what would this do? What would this T-Hub do? T-Hub is nothing but a place where ideators, place where innovators, tinkerers, disruptors, all of them, anybody who has an idea can walk in with an idea and walk out with a product. And in a country like India, it's a very, very difficult thing to do because more often than not, in fact, like I said, ideas get nipped in the bud. More often than not, you're told that your idea is just not good enough and you're not good enough for the market. So what we do there in T-Hub is essentially provide our youngsters, Indian youngsters, a platform to dabble, to basically cherish their innovation. We give them access to mentorship. We give them access to investors. We give them access to market as well. Because some of the youngsters from Hyderabad who wanted to ease out a few pain points of the government as well. In fact, we've given them an opportunity, and today their products have really taken off as well. So we've not only been able to inspire, to create a larger ecosystem. Today, Hyderabad also has the largest number of incubators for the number of academic institutions we have in our city. So it's just a great platform that the government has created, and hopefully entrepreneurs and the private sector will take it to the next level and will create more and more Vijay Shekhar Sharmas.
Okay, great. And Karthik, what do you think about the role that incubators play in startup creation?
I think as the minister said, there's a lot of people who have ideas, but they might not necessarily know where to go and how to go about the process of starting up. Anyone who's done it before understands very clearly that there are, again, there's no guarantee for success, but understands very clearly that there are a set of things you need to put in place. There's a certain way to proceed. Incubators help a first-time entrepreneur get through all of that. So it really speeds your time to market because there's a lot of learnings you do, a lot of failed steps, missteps that you help avoid. I also agree with the minister on the role of the government. You said that government should, first thing they can do is stay out of it, and I think that's a great point. And in particular, also after that, supporting the ecosystem. You mentioned the Stanford ecosystem. Israel is another great example. South Korea, where they've put in a lot in terms of infrastructure to support the startup ecosystem. Personally, I'm a bit skeptical about government-owned or operated incubators. I'm very much a believer in government as a key pillar in terms of the ecosystem. Whether the government can pick the right kinds of ideas to fund and help them take off and produce returns, it's not clear. There are very few examples of that. In fact, even the US government has a very large project known as the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Project. It's almost like a VC fund. They gave close to $1 million to various startups. Very few success stories despite a $1 billion plus budget. And I think over there's not very much evidence that government-owned incubators work, but outside of that, government as an ecosystem supporter, enabler, very important. And coming back to your question, are incubators useful? Where do they add value? Absolutely no doubt that, for a first-time entrepreneur, there's so many missteps that you should expect to make, and working at an incubator, being able to share ideas with other entrepreneurs or with you, having that ecosystem of support, it's huge.
Minister, do you want to respond to his
Well, I just
point
want to
on-
clarify one thing to Karthik, and that is, while T-Hub is government-owned, it is not operated by the government. In fact, I am not even recognized when I go there. So that goes to show you that the government does not really meddle, and I do live up to my promises. I have created an infrastructure, we have created an infrastructure, but we have definitely stayed out of it because, like you said, I'm a firm believer. I've lived in the United States for 8 years, and I've only had to visit a government office once, that too to a DMV to get my license, right? So, point I'm trying to make is governance is not about being seen or heard. Governance is about being felt. So, I'm a firm believer in this theory that in the world's largest democracy, India, as the government of India, and also state governments can do much better if we actually governed and not really meddled, so to put. So therefore, I would like to clarify that we do not definitely believe in meddling, and it's not government that drives the innovation. It's the private sector that drives the innovation. And we don't even get into the aspect of funding. You mentioned SBIR. In fact, I happened to visit one of their facilities in Philadelphia. Yes, it's a sad story because governments cannot spur innovation. For example, the point I was trying to make though was government can aid innovation in a way because in India, I don't know how long you've lived in India, Karthik, or how long you've experienced India, but in India, when you are riding a motorbike, say, for example, the cops will stop you and ask you for a registration card, a driver's license, and insurance. Now, we gave this challenge to one of our startups in Hyderabad called Radical Tribe. They came out with a solution and they said, if you have a smartphone, store everything electronically in a wallet, and this should be acceptable to the police. So therefore, even if you forgot one of these papers, you do all right. We've had more than 1.2 million downloads in the first 1 month. So that goes to show you the strength of homegrown innovation and easing out a pain point for a common man in India, aided by the government and not necessarily completely funded by the government.
Thanks for the clarification. And by the way, using government resources and even connections to have startups that solve public realm problems, I think that's huge. And I fly frequently to Hyderabad, so I don't want to be on the blacklist, so I will not.
You should download one of those RTAM wallets.
Gaurav, like when we talk about startups, we only think of internet-based startups these days. But what is happening in other sectors?
Well, the way I look at it, I think there are opportunities everywhere. So to use Silicon Valley terminology, there are a lot of white spaces in India. And they are also in boring sectors. So look at logistics, look at consumer products. And you'll see a lot of growth and a lot of value creation there. If you were to just compare this to the US, if you look at saturation levels of auto sales or insurance penetration or whatever you have, right, it's reached pretty deep, and therefore you have only limited growth. You take a new technology, you take a new way of servicing an Amazon, right, and you have a J-curve type of growth. In India, you see that J-curve growth everywhere. I'll give you an example. A company started, I think, in 2011 called Vinny Cosmetics. They make a brand of deodorant called Fog, which some of you may have seen on television. Fog went from 0 to approximately $20 million of PAT in 7 years. It's going to get valued, or it has been valued in a private market at about $1 billion. And that's where you are. It's growing very fast. It looks and feels, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the trends, it looks and feels like a high operating margin, high operating leverage internet play, although it isn't. You know. Similarly, we invested in a technology company which was a proxy on consumer, which is cold chain, this, that, and the other, and it's going to list in the next 6 months. We expect we'll get a valuation of somewhere between $500 to $750 million. Okay. Again, it was started by it was started pretty much Silicon Valley style. 3 kids who were at Harvard undergrad got together, sat in a restaurant, and ideated. So they named the company Brattle Foods because of Brattle Street, which runs through Harvard. We invested in that company, did pretty well, merged it with Kishore Biani's logistics company called Future Supply Chain, and this joint company will IPO. Now, I'm maximum bullish about India. So I see growth everywhere. I see growth in auto and auto-derived things. I see growth in insurance and insurance-derived things. And therefore, we believe we don't necessarily have to do high jumps to find the next Paytm. You can find the next Bajaj Finserv, which is sitting right here, right? And you can go through the same growth through a standard, some might argue boring, NBFC that you can do with a more sexy technology play.
Okay. And as an investor, do you think there needs to be some sort of a balance between scale and profitability? Because right now we see all these companies, like e-commerce companies, they say that we are right now focused on expanding our business. We are not worried about profits. But where do investors stand on that?
It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, if you just step back outside of technology, and let's assume you were Pepsi, and you were trying to build a Pepsi business in India, I don't think you can reach profitability within 5 or 7 or 10 years. So you make a plan where a Pepsi says, I want to create scale first and get to profitability later, and this is my 15-year plan. Now, because it is hidden between a balance sheet of a large company, it doesn't get noticed that they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build an India business. When a startup tries to do the same thing, which means try to build scale, is fundraising at the same time, it becomes in your face that, okay, you're growing, but you're growing profitlessly. I'm not so worried about that. I think if you build the right business, if you build the right scale, profits will follow. And this is not a myth, it's actually a reality. We've seen it in one business after another.
Can I quickly jump
Yes,
in? To what, just to add to what Gaurav was saying, I think I completely agree with him. But since we're talking scaling up and creating mini multinationals, I think one of the most important things to understand is we need our entrepreneurs to also have the product to market fit executed properly. Meaning, see, we need to understand the Indian context. You want to reach out to the rural folks, you want to reach out to the 70% of India that lives in the rural areas. Classic example would be the FMCG sector and how they have innovated. Like he said, I think the boring sector, but in FMCG, up until they figured out that even a shampoo could be sold in a sachet, I think they could not break that barrier of really reaching the last mile and reaching the rural households. So once they've broken it, now today we've seen shampoos and FMCGs just growing rapidly. The same thing with a startup in technology space called Redbus. Again, the guy basically looked at a pain point of a commoner. I want to book a bus ticket, right? Then he went about creating a solution, a tech solution, which basically gave the common man of India the ability to click a button and book a ticket from the convenience of his mobile phone. So the point I'm trying to make is the right kind of a product to market fit is what will help you scale up quickly and what will help you disrupt. Just because you have a fancy technology or a fancy solution doesn't matter. I think what matters is how the consumer is going to receive it and how you're going to be able to give it to them in such a way that they actually like it and actually find the value in it.
Okay. And also,
Can I add
like,
something here?
yeah.
So I think this notion of let's get scale or let's get enough market share and profitability will eventually happen is a tactic that's come out of the Valley. And it's basically this notion that it's in a market that has intrinsic scale. It's a market where willingness to pay is very high, whether you're talking about consumers or whether you're talking about enterprises. And so in a lot of these markets, if you capture enough of the market share, you know that you can price it the way you want and you'll be profitable. In India, the same tactics have been employed, and it doesn't always work because I think, to your point, sometimes what is happening is a lot of investors and entrepreneurs are building Me Too companies. We are the Blue Apron of India. We are the so-and-so of India. And the point is, a product that's built for the West is a product that is essentially a product for the top 1 or 2% of India. You don't have scale in those. Whereas if you focus on really Indian problems, you definitely have scale and those same tactics will work. But if you're just pretty much imitating a Western product that has found scale in the US and you try the same thing here, it doesn't work. And I think that's been the problem with some of these like food tech and a bunch of other areas where these approaches have backfired.
So what is wrong with a Me Too product when it is actually answering a need in the country? Like Flipkart could be a Me Too product, but
There's no problem with a Me Too product if it's solving a need, but I think that's not always the case. So, so we call it idea arbitrage, right? Which is if you look at what is the risk with any startup, there's market risk, there's product risk, right? Market risk is, does the market want something like this? The product risk is whether you can build that. So nice thing about idea arbitrage is you're eliminating market risk. But what's important is that the market risk should, in reality, be eliminated. So if you're solving a real need locally, it's fine. But if on the other hand, you kind of say, hey, this is a company that's scaled, very big in the US, and that's our comparable, and we're just going to do it, that backfires. Multiple companies I've worked with in India over the last few years, when they go raising their venture money, all of them have this question of what's the comparable, global comparable. And so sometimes it's hard for an entrepreneur to get the usual tech VCs to get them to back them if they can't point to a comparable outside. And so that requires a certain amount of creativity among investors as well.
Vijay, do you want to add to this?
I think there are two conversations, one about the profitability and second about the India-US that got brought up. First about profitability. Technology should be looked at as an infrastructure if you're changing the behavior. it takes many years for consumers to change the behavior. And in India, the technology-led products are incidentally going to change consumer behavior for masses. And they inevitably take multiple years. Profitable, non-profitable, liver or profit or lucky profit, whichever the end journey would be, it's not a secret to the entrepreneur or the investor that per capita income, per user per user long-term value is going to be smaller. So we talked about in the beginning that hundreds of million will be an obligation. So in US, 20, 40 million customers could be a significant success. In this country, maybe that number is 200, 300 million then. So profit, talk about Google, Facebook, Amazon, anyone else. Now we're talking Western company. Let's talk about Asian companies. Let's talk about Taobao, Alibaba, Alipay, and everybody else in China, Zhong'an, and so on and so forth. And then all these companies are early years of investment. They're like nearly infrastructure investments because consumers are going to be on this road for a long number of times. Then you have a business model very visible and valuable. So I totally agree with what Gaurav says, that I would say you can't be oblivious and dumb that you will not make money, but you can't be dumb and killing the child that he's not running on a speed of somebody who is an adult. In other words, companies take time to get mature. These are called startups. There is an obligation. Yeah, at the same time, there can be a lucky startup which makes money on day one. Yeah, you're lucky. This industry segment will be. Talk about the second thing about US idea, India arbitration, and I like the point that you said that why should Flipkart be not called an innovation and a very valuable product in India, and why should it be looked at as a cheap imitation or a very replica of Amazon? The only reason Amazon replica rationale is challenging is because Amazon is run by an American founder-led company. If you talk about Travelocity, if you talk about Expedia, Indian entrepreneurs just didn't let that happen. I mean, there is a winner in OTA, which is a sort of a mature e-commerce market, if you will, is an Indian company, and number 1, 2, and 3 are Indian companies. Not even an American company is there. Now, again, logically, the travel businesses, top tier customers are more like a la US. Yeah, US company was also there in that market. The reason that we may be giving less probability of Flipkart to become long-term successful is purely because there is an endless money supply. So one day or other, endless money supply can win a finite money supply. That's the rationale that is put. If you were to cap the amount of money that is available to Amazon in India and to Flipkart in India, that's the answer I can write, and I'll be long on Flipkart in single step immediately. So what challenge for Indian entrepreneurs or companies been is when they fight in the categories where their global counterpart is a founder-led company. If it is a management-run company, I'll go aggressive and bomb. And if it is a founder-led company, like Travis's company, like Jeff Bezos' company, Google, yeah, you can fight anything in India which is built by Google. Not saying that it is not going to go aggressive, just saying that there is not enough mojo to fight it like a founder. So that is what I would say, the nuanced difference that I'll put on the table. And at the same point in time, there is nothing called Western innovations are not to bring in India. Customization, obligation of market adaptability will come. And at the same point in time, built in India, built for world will also get built. I truly believe that as Paytm, we are championing a built in India, built for world model. And at the same point in time, there are shades and points which are totally inspired and learned and blatantly copied from somewhere else. And there is no secret about it and there is no qualm about it.
Just to quickly butt in and add one point to what both Karthik and Vijay have said, the idea arbitrage, Me Too, imitation versus innovation, etc. A lot of times we assume and we believe that the world has become flat because technology is a great leveler. Everything, it doesn't matter where innovation happens, Israel, India, or US. Fact of the matter is, when I saw, as a complete outsider looking at the valuation, when I saw WhatsApp being valued at $19 billion, I almost fell off my chair. Point I'm trying to make is, had WhatsApp, hypothetically speaking, had WhatsApp been an Indian company like Paytm, do you really think it would have gotten the same valuation? I don't think so.
Even with the same distribution? Like
Absolutely. Everything else being equal.
Yeah.
Had it been an Indian company versus a US company.
They treat third world companies like third world companies.
Absolutely. The point I'm trying to make is,
Third world valuation.
in today's world, honestly, that is a matter of fact. In today's world, if some Indian were to innovate and create a product which is far better than what is being created in Valley today, would he get the same valuation? I don't think so. While we like to believe and why we love this romantic idea that technology has leveled everything, fact of the matter is physicality, location, and proximity does matter.
Yeah.
If you're on a Sandy Hill road, you definitely stand a better chance of getting a much better valuation than in Gurgaon or Bombay or.
Totally. The cost of software built on Sandhill Road or Bay Area versus cost of software built in Koramangala. The Koramangala software is treated like a cheap one-third of the cost. KG is sitting here in this room. He can tell as an Infosys or as a TCS, you never get the same cost, comma, that's the business model dot,
Maybe you should try Hyderabad.
the T-Hub.
Yes.
Karthik, do you want to add to this? That third world countries get third world valuation?
That's a good tagline.
I really like that, yeah.
Good one, yeah?
Well,
An American will never accept it. Or a person flying from America will. Let's see.
We'll
I'm
check
just
his
prejudging-
We'll ask Gaurav
I'm just
also after
prejudging it.
the
Let's
passport is very much Indian, and
Okay.
I'm here
We're
often
not
enough.
treating you like less Indian or more American either, but the intention is to say, point of view of the Western opinion will never treat that the poor or third world are treated like poor or third
We
world.
should talk about the experience he had recently in the US. We'll talk about it offline.
So clearly, the views are coming from a place of personal pain. I can see that. But you know, I think while I agree with what you're saying. I also think that the quality of what is built in India lags the quality of what is built in the valley.
Yeah.
And so
this
there
and-
is a quality difference. And I'm not saying this.
Is it quality or perceived quality?
No, it is true quality.
I think this has happened with Japan at one point in time when Japan used to produce these small motors, motorized products. Remember that Japan was not a good quality. It happened and it is happening as we speak for China. China is not a good quality. While the fact of matter as more tangible people who are on the ground will say, no, there is no difference of one over other country's production.
That's
You
exactly
can't
what I
say
meant.
you can't say that industrial production done in China is inferior to the industrial production done in Germany. Yeah, the days are gone now. And similarly, the Japan is not producing bad class product. So we Indian, like all these countries, have done the championing to the world. I don't think the software built in Bangalore is less. When you talk to Sundar and when you talk to Satya Nadella, they will also acknowledge, and they, at least in a verbal conversation or visual conversation to the world say, oh, we are so proud, we are building Google News here, we are doing blah here, we are doing blah blah here, and this is so world class. And I saw a tweet from Amitabh Kant a few days back, IBM has more number of people in India than others. IBM softwares are not going to be world class now. Is that the truth then?
But yeah, I mean, even if you look at Google and all these guys, they're doing some great stuff here, but they've still not moved their most important products to India. So what products are they building from here? So all of these companies haven't yet done that. I don't doubt for a minute that there's a perception problem, right? So there is an absolute, I completely agree there's a perception problem. But I think there's also, as far as the reality goes, I worked with lots of companies with India development centers. It's hard to hire high quality engineers at scale in India. You get a few of them, but you want a really large workforce at scale. It's very hard to do that in India. And so, so I think that's an unfortunate reality. I think as Indian customers are asking for more, Indian engineers are also raising their bar. And so eventually we'll get there.
Actually, I'm sure you know in few days back, last couple of years, Indian startups tried to import Indians from outside to build the product. Didn't work out, but finally it has to be local. I totally agree. One of the reasons that has been is that Indians who are coming out of, there is still a charm of foreign location. Actually, I think I'm going to give it that. Just after independence, it was a government job. After government job, it was PSU job, a private job, an MNC job, a startup job. And now, I mean, these are 10 years, if you're noticing the personality, right? There is a startup of fancy right now. And the problem is that in the startup world, because the world is now treating, a DB Shaw will pay, or let's say even Google or somebody else will pay for a US position. So India versus international has not cracked yet completely. The new engineer still believes that there is a superior dollar that will come out, ROI for effort immediately if that person has gone outside India. This is the truth which happened in the like engineer to MBA also. Why they did not produce great number of engineers as programmers? Because those who were in India just became MBAs and they were in more business jobs, less engineering jobs. Those remain engineers went MBA, or sorry, MS, and then they remain in US. So India had technically a dearth of scalable programming people in India that structurally existed for last 5-7 years. Unless that becomes something called either they don't go for MBA or they don't go international, we won't see that supply settling. But the opportunity for India is, that if we are talking about India to scale, India has to domestically produce incredible amount of engineers, and that is the only way we, whether talk about AI, whether talk about data, whether we talk about future or past technologies, we'll not be able to get it.
So do we have to produce incredible amount of engineers or incredible engineers? Because we are producing incredible amount of engineers.
Correct. So the answer was, there was no secret. Incredible engineers.
Yeah.
Incredible amount we produce anyways.
Minister, you wanted to?
I just wanted to add one thing. I think all said and done, since we're talking scale, since we're talking scaling up, and since we're talking international versus Indian, one of the things that we have to admit and confess to, Indians and Indian entrepreneurs still have the bent of mind of a problem solver. We don't really have the bent of mind of an entrepreneur in terms of articulating, in terms of just outselling your product, in terms of really selling your product so well. Because if you've lived in America or if you've experienced the American way of selling, I don't think anybody can beat the Americans at selling. While they may not have a great product compared to a Paytm, they'll outsell you and they'll outclass you in their marketing effort than their articulation. I think that's one of the key things for Indian multinationals. Or if you really want an Indian entrepreneur to scale up and become a multinational, I think one of the things we need to imbibe and develop a culture of is to be able to articulate, is to be able to really present, is to be able to really do a kick-ass job of marketing your product, not just be content with in having the best product in the world, but also being able to really talk about it, pitch it, and really get the attention of the world.
I just want to add to this. I think the differential between an American company and, let's say, an Indian company, let's assume it used to be X, right? I think that's reducing. We've already seen that with China. Now, some countries which have small populations and therefore smaller markets may not be able to effectively launch that challenge. But because India has a large domestic market, a lot of Indian companies, like a lot of the Chinese companies, can effectively launch a challenge. And I think that gap is decreasing, and I think it will decrease further in the years to come.
Yeah. True. And Minister, I just wanted to figure out, how has the central government Startup India initiative helped startups in states like Telangana?
Exactly what SBIR, is it?
Yes,
SBIR in the US has done. Not much, in fact. I mean, this is all good to talk about this as a program, You can't do entrepreneurship in a factory mode. That doesn't happen. Innovation and entrepreneurship are some things that you cannot inculcate. You can at best aid innovators, you can at best give them the platform. But beyond that, if you think you can spur innovation by allocating 10,000 crores, I'm not sure how much of which they've spent or given to anybody. Because as far as I know, they haven't given a dime to Telangana. So I don't know where they're spending all the money then. Point I'm trying to make is, governments at best can create an infrastructure, can create a platform, can create regulations which make it easy to do business. Don't come in the way of doing business. Give them an easy, low entry barrier kind of mode. Give them an environment where they can come in easy and get out easy if need be. Even if they have to wind up, let them wind up easy. Have a good exit policy and entry policy. Beyond that, talking money and saying, there are enough people in the world who are wanting to invest. There is enough money in the world in the private sector where people are ready to invest in great ideas. It's ideas that don't seem to exist in that many numbers. The only way to create or have a good idea is to have many ideas, is how they put it. So I think the only way you can start doing this is possibly encouraging hackathons from high school. Don't go startup Indias. Encourage kids to innovate from startup stage, a young stage. In India, typically, as Vijay put it, there is always this culture that sweeps through the nation. When I was growing up, I was only given two choices. I was told either you have to be an engineer or a doctor.
No politician.
Well, they'd say politician. My father wasn't so receptive. Anyway, that's a different story. We'll talk about it later.
I thought at least people like you should have a choice.
Nahi,
People like
bhai.
us are grew up
Yeah,
in that family. Doctor or engineer?
We'll talk about it offline. My own story again is not what we're talking here. Point I'm trying to make is, we have this environment, we have this culture that stifles any new ideas, any fresh ideas in our children. So let's start young, catch them young, do hackathons, give them the pain points of common man, ask them to find solutions, absorb them into the government, let the private sector pick them up, then let them scale up. But to just say, I'm allocating a fund, now you go ahead and do whatever, that doesn't work.
Okay. And also going back to scaling up, what are some of the classic mistakes that Indian startups are making? We had certain food tech companies that scaled and then scaled back. So what's going on here? Vijay, do you want to talk about this?
I think we just heard very clearly, and I acknowledge Karthik's point that as an Indians, we do not have resources in technology sense, necessarily not money. Now, so what mistakes that we ended up doing was we all were on that treadmill where by throwing money we were raising more money, by throwing money we were raising more money, was growing it so that we can raise more money. And that cycle was not necessarily producing some tangible outcome. And that is, I think, is a worry for anyone. I think that is a worry as a Gaurav would want to feel bad about it, and as an individual entrepreneur, I would like to feel bad about that. We've been throwing money, we are not building anything. This is not a race. Whether it is in food or whether it is in commerce or any other category, nearly that happened for a significant number of times, and that happens significant number of times. And then you outspend to win the market is the myth, which is sometimes seemingly reality, and people are still in that game.
Okay, okay, fair enough. We'll take some questions from the audience now. Are there any questions?
I'd like to have Gaurav or Karthik talk about this problem, that as an outside or as an investor, what do you think Indian entrepreneurs are doing wrong? I mean, while there is a question and answer.
I would like to make two comments on that. One is a lot of copycat ideas are there. Okay? And if you don't need to be politically correct, I'll just call them dumb ideas. So a lot of bad ideas got funded. And then investors blamed the entrepreneurs instead of blaming themselves. So that's one set. Second, at least we found that typically in young companies, continuity is a bigger problem than we had thought when we made those bets. Whether it's the churn in the teams, disagreements, and so on and so forth, we've seen that to be a bigger challenge in scaling than I would have thought. Third, I think in India, we have bigger cycles of the tap of money is on and the tap of money is off. So at least we've advised companies we fund to be slightly overcapitalized, when the natural tendency of the company is to be slightly undercapitalized because it's less dilutive. So that's another tension, which I think in India is a little bit more important than in, let's say, a US market, where the tap is a little bit more continuous. So these are at least three of our experiences.
And why is it that investors made so many bad decisions? Like this acronym FOMO, it suddenly became part of everybody's lingo in the last 5-6 years. What exactly happened there?
Everybody is chasing returns, right? And there's a lot of optionality, right? Where you say, okay, this could become that. Well, people don't think about what it takes to go from here to there. So that's why a lot of dumb decisions got funded.
If I might add, so Vijay and I were on the jury of ET Awards last year, and we saw about 50 plus startups in various categories. And on the positive side, one thing that I was blown away by is the breadth of the startups in terms of, we're not just talking about e-commerce and so on, but biotech, industrial engineering, robotics and so on. Amazing breadth to match Silicon Valley, in fact. But what I was surprised by is the lack of scale. Some of the companies that we hear a lot about, when you actually look at the numbers, and we get to see the numbers, right? And so when you look at the numbers, I was surprised. It's just 10 million, 20 million, and I hear so much about them. A company with that scale is no news in the Valley because that's just getting started. So I think there's a clear scaling problem. And as I was looking into it and trying to figure out what's going on, I think there's a macro problem and a micro problem. A macro problem is, again, back to the same old purchasing power is low, and for the entrepreneur, it costs a lot to reach consumers. So your marketing costs are not much lower than in the US. So one of the examples in e-commerce, marketing costs were about just a third of e-commerce marketing costs in the US, but the average revenue per user was a tenth. So, so there are those kinds of macro factors. And I think, as Vijay was saying, one of the biggest things from a macro perspective that has happened is Jio. Just brings so many more people, provides that technology infrastructure, at least for tech companies. But I think on the micro side, again, lots of Me Too companies, people pursuing the wrong kinds of problems. And to your point, why did investors chase these kinds of problems when they were in the right problems? I would blame a fund like SoftBank as one of the chief culprits. So they went into a lot of these companies, and some of these companies, I was actually as part of an angel group talking about an angel investment in a company where we were thinking of putting $1 million into a startup, and they were asking for 8 million valuation, which we thought wasn't justified. And SoftBank came in and put in $20 million at a $35 million valuation. We said, they don't have the numbers to support that. And then 1 year later, they shut it down. So I think a lot of them were sold on the India is the next China vision. A lot of Indian VCs also sold that to their US investors. And so I think India is the next China was the vision that brought in a lot of capital, created this land grab mentality among VCs.
There's a 1.3 billion people market.
I think the macro numbers become very seductive. So one of the things people use is what is the per capita penetration or consumption of XYZ product in India. You compare it to Thailand or you compare it to Indonesia, forget Western developed markets. And you say, well, this is space to be taken. It's not that obvious that this is space to be taken. Very often when entrepreneurs come to me, I ask them, okay, so what's your market size? They give you such bizarre numbers as to what the market size is. So I ask them, okay, what is your market size in 5 or 10 years, not in 50 years? You know? And people overestimate the market size systematically.
An example of that, so one of my former students, Neeraj Kakkar, he started Paperboat. So the first product they launched was a protein drink in India. And their PowerPoint was essentially what is the per capita protein consumption in the US multiplied by 1.2 billion, right? So that was their product. And he told me that, they used to go to Punjabi Bagh here, sit outside the gyms trying to sell protein. And he said, this place is the carbohydrate capital of the world. People have chole bhature for health purposes. Nobody wants to have protein over there. Even the people who have protein come in and say, I had it yesterday, I don't see a difference today, and so on.
Let's have chola bhatura today and see a difference.
Chole bhature, you see the difference right away.
Carbohydrate capital of the world. That's sugar, carbohydrate capital.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of diet. So then, by the way, another guy came to them a week later and said that, soy protein, I heard this causes impotency, so I'm not using it. So, anyway, that's a separate issue. But the point is, they just use, I don't know. I've not faced that problem.
All right.
But coming back, then they switched to an energy drink. They said, okay, Gatorade is a big deal. We're going to do the Gatorade of India. And they tried that. Right, and they switched from protein to carbohydrate, and that failed. And in fact, they fell into what they do and what they're doing well at, Ampanna, Amras, and all of those things. Almost as an afterthought, one of their co-founders was American, and his parents visited India, and he wanted to buy them that. And they went to stores and they didn't find it. And that's when it struck them, oh, you know what, everyone wants to drink this and nobody has the time to make it and it's not available. It's a classic example of, you're pursuing the wrong problem. And it takes them 3 years, but eventually they ran into it. But I think that's the problem everyone has. Take a US or China number, multiply it on a per capita basis.
I think the government audience has been always saying, solve India problems, solve Indians' problems, solve India's related problems. If you notice, this is such a American drink, American eats. Okay, let's come down to chola bhatura now. And that's an Indian drink and Indian eat.
Questions? Where are the mic?
So, question for you. When it comes to startup,
Can you introduce yourself? quickly?
I'm so sorry. Mukul Goyal from the Global Shapers, Surat Hub. When you talk about startup, when you talk about e-commerce startup, still after a decade, which we see, even if a new startup which comes, when they want to flourish in the market, they still have to give cashbacks. They have to come up with discounts. They have to come up with good number of discounts to grab attention of the people, right? Whereas the idea of an e-commerce startup was that you do not have to go anywhere, and the delivery will be done at your doorstep, right? Whereas that idea is still not taken back by the Indians as of now. How long do you think that an Indian mentality would change, and cashbacks and discount, we would stop running after cashbacks and discounts, and we would start understanding that yes, this is where the Indian mindset is.
Why should we forget about discounts and cashback? Everybody will offer you for good. Someday you will realize that some of things are not on discount and cashback and they are making money. It will remain for good.
So the sounds of a good.
They're for good. Cashback and discounts will remain for good. That's it. That's a rule. The number and percentage can reduce or increase, and for some item will be less or more. It will be for good. Why should I not?
Just to butt in, you're talking about the Indian mentality. You should see in America, Karthik will tell you, the coupon mentality in America, it's absurd. They're obsessed with the coupons they collect every single day from various tabloids and newspapers and
remain.
things like that. If there are any Americans, no offense. Point I'm trying to make is, it's got nothing to do with Indianness or Americanness.
Everybody
It's-
wants
it's-
cheaper, better products.
Exactly.
And if somebody is ready to produce, they will get it. Somebody is ready to sell, they'll sell it. The question is, will somebody stop selling it like discount? Answer is no. Everybody wants to outspend other in long term or optimize the spend to outspend other. That's the business model.
Can we get a mic?
Absolutely.
At the back.
Hi, Rishi Iyengar from CNN Money. So late last year, there was a couple of the big startup founders said the government should be doing more to support Indian startups, and that led to a big debate, a big conversation. So my question is for the whole panel, sort of in the context of today's discussion, how do you want to get your thoughts on that first of all, and how do you reconcile increased competition, increased foreign investment, and foreign companies coming in with making sure Indian startups also get the boost they need?
I think as far as the foreign part, how is the central government's startup initiative shaping up and what should they do? And second is foreign startups are coming in India,
Yeah,
killing the Indian dudes. So
basically the whole
to kill it.
tussle between the competition between Indian
Indian
startups,
versus-
some of them
Yeah.
Me Too companies and
I
the
think
foreign
that's
players.
the second part is a more interesting for me to answer. The first answer have experts of experienced sectors. I'll say that as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, you pick the ticket that is the most optimum for you right now. If you got the money, I care a F about it. If I didn't get money, oh, this guy is international, he should not be given. That's a rule of the business, right? You optimize your tickets and then you play on that card. The same company which will be worried about international companies is international and internationally funded and internationally owned by shareholders. So it's just the kind of card on which day you want to pick up. Someday, there is one Indian entrepreneur who's very popular, and the gentleman picked up, like, I'd say herbal entrepreneur. I don't know how to call him herbal entrepreneur. Baba Ramdev, I'm trying to quote here.
Herba Pronure.
Ayurveda, yeah, but my point is he pitches Indian. He says we'll take the bird off the Nestle, and he says we'll do it together. Buy this. So now every business picks up a card. I'll say that. As an Indian entrepreneur who were picking that card, on that day they didn't have money, so they wanted to say that can I save something? Now they have money, they will not bother about it for some more time. That I can say.
Yeah, I think foreign companies coming to India is great. First of all, it's amazing for customers. Have created a lot more competition. Amazon coming in has forced Flipkart to up its game. Uber coming in has forced Ola to up their game. I think there's no doubt that those guys coming in, it's just a huge win for customers. And I also think Indian companies can take them on. So, a year or two back, these same entrepreneurs were asking the government for protection. But I think to your point that, they brought in foreign capital, and that's okay, but foreign companies cannot come in. They took on local players, and those guys
It's art of
didn't want
convenience,
protection,
it's-
right? It's convenient talk, but at the end of the day, I think this is great for consumers, it's great for the market as well.
Okay, so I used to believe long back that why would a competition will be needed to pitch more innovation or creativity or good for consumer, but landing in banking industry from sequence of things in life, I just simply know it. It is the competition that drives the peer and the incumbents. Otherwise, they structurally are made to milk and make milk made out of it, not just less milk out of it. In other words, continue to milk more out of it. Yeah.
Last one.
Hi, my name is Sudarshan. I am a global shaper as well from Pune Hub, and I run a learning and development startup back there. So one of the challenges I've been facing personally is scaling up again, and I realize one of the key solutions to that is technologically driven solutions, and we're trying to work on that. So my question specifically is with regards to hiring. So you said getting incredible engineers is a problem. Now, of course, that's a big problem for bigger startups which have the funding as well. For a company like mine, which is comparatively smaller, finding the right kind of incredible engineers to build those products is even more of a problem. Now, mine's a bootstrap startup. So what do you think companies like mine have an option of? do we go for, if it's a bootstrap, we don't really have the resources to hire incredible engineers. So if you could just
The answer
share
is
something.
these 3 words.
Sure.
Um, uh, People polarize on purpose. In early days, you better have team which is belonging to the purpose. Later days, when money is there, people can come for a ride and make more money, etc., etc. But you, as an early day startup, have an obligation to pick up the team which believes in what you're doing is the most important thing that can happen in their life. Then they will put extraordinary amount of effort. Does not matter that engineer knew or not knew. I remember in the early days of my company, I used to recruit the people who were not recruited by anyone, technically rejects. And I was the most intelligent person in the technology team. Imagine the business guy being the most intelligent person in technology team. And it was a reverse osmosis, I used to call it, that instead of learning from you, I'm giving you knowledge. But at that, all said and done, ultimately, extraordinary hardworking team which can hustle is a success for an early stage startup, not the trophy recruits. And ultimately, people will polarize for the purpose, create the core team, which will go a long way than just having resources and throwing money to hire them.
You know, I want
Thank
to
you.
quote a very interesting Google research, which some of you may have come across. So Google did a study of their best programmers, and they found domain knowledge wasn't it. Okay, they found personality wasn't it. It was cognitive breadth, ability to work in teams, and determination. These were the 3 driving factors. I would have thought for a narrow job like programming, domain knowledge would be number 1, followed by other things, and it wasn't.
Okay. We have time for one final question.
I run a software company in the US that just moved over 90% of its engineering to India. And the cost advantage alone will draw people to India, but we're trying to figure out which other areas does India have a competitive advantage that we could invest in. You know, what can I get in India that I can't get in the US, for
I
instance,
think Make in
beyond
India
cost?
is definitely, you should build factories. Our government wants you to build factories in India. Make in India.
Well, I'd say a couple of things.
Make in India, please. What is the
I'm
joke
sorry,
about
sir,
it?
what's your name, sir?
My name is Ashifi.
Okay. I'll just say one thing quickly. You talked about cost advantage. You may have made a movie like Avatar with hundreds of millions of dollars. Recently, India has created its own version of Avatar called Bahubali, where 95% of it was shot in a city like Hyderabad. Again, at I would say 1/10 the cost. Animation, gaming, multimedia, entertainment, cybersecurity, Internet of Things, analytics. These are all areas where India is going to rock because our population, if you look at it, I mean, I'm not just talking cost advantage, I'm talking a creative advantage as well. If you look at our population and the numbers here, the metrics here, more than 50% of our population is less than the age of 27. So that gives us a huge advantage over a longer period as well. If you're looking for longevity, if you're looking for creativity, if you're looking for impact, I think India is the place to be in. So it's not just the cost advantage that matters, it's also all the other things that I just mentioned and all the other sectors that I just talked about. We talked about ransomware, we read about ransomware recently. Now, India can not only innovate for itself, but also we can produce world-class products right here and we can market them outside as well. So, great opportunity for you. Glad you moved 90% of your business to India.
All right, all right. So I think we have to wrap up now. Are there any, you have to make any final comments? What is it that you found most insightful about this session? I can begin with Gaurav.
But I think, you know, I believe in the India story. The India story can go up and down, but I believe in it. And I believe in it for a simple reason. Think of operating leverage of the Indian consumer. If I'm making $100, I'm spending $80 on my day-to-day needs, $20 is disposable. My income is going up in real terms by 5-6%, which in India is happening. My disposable income may be growing at 15, 20, 25%. So you have millions of Indians crossing this threshold where our disposable income is growing at very fast rates, which makes India a great long-term play for all kinds of companies, startups in the technology space, startups in the non-technology space, in businesses which are mature in the Western world. And I think it's an area to play.
Karthik?
I think my takeaway, based on what the group said, Gaurav mentioned this, Mr. Ramarao also talked about this, about focus on Indian problems. I liked what Vijay said about people polarize on purpose. So in terms of an Indian initial founding team, to focus more on passion for those problems and build out from those. So those are my takeaways from it.
So my takeaway would be, in terms of scaling up, I don't think any startup or any enterprise should not try and boil the ocean. Try and find the right product fit to the market, go at it, and keep at it. I think that's the mantra.
I think I was surprised by Make in India comment of audience.
Okay, all right. Okay, so for me it was third world companies get third world
Third world country
valuations.
companies
And-
and third
Third
world
world
valuations.
And India is the carbohydrate capital.
Carbohydrate capital.
Also the diabetes capital of the
Not
world.
India, I said Punjabi Bagh. and
Punjabi
maybe
Bagh is
Delhi.
the carbohydrate capital of the world.
That's like taking a pot shot on our.
I know.
That's like, what did you do? What kind of questions you did to him?
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us in this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.